Tonight, we are pleased to welcome Anita Carson, the Director of Field and Community Organizing for Equality Florida, where she works to build lasting political power within the LGBT communities across the state. Her background is an educator, labor, and grassroots organizer. She dedicates her work to empowering local communities to advocate for equality, dignity, and justice through sustained people power organizing. Please use the Zoom hand raise feature found at the reactions button to raise your hand during the Q&A should you have a question or a comment after the presentation. Let's mute our mic until it's time to speak. Please know we are recording the presentation for posterity and uploading to our YouTube channel. As a side note, we're open to the public. We don't know what might be said during our Q&A discussion. Sometimes we cringe, sometimes we laugh, sometimes we cheer, or sometimes we nod in quiet approval. We always look forward to a robust civil discussion. So now, let's welcome Anita Carson. Anita, we are all yours. Thank you for being with us tonight, Anita.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ken. I appreciate the introduction. And I'll give y'all a little bit of background about my before I put the screen back up. But as Ken said, I am an educator by trade first. I was a teacher for more than a decade and mostly teaching science and language, but my degree is in history and language. And I moved to working for Equality Florida in 2022, around the time the first Don't Say or Trans bill was moving through the legislature. And for me, it was important that I continued to do work for my students, but that I didn't feel comfortable staying in a classroom where I couldn't be myself or where I could really fully support my LGBTQ students and their families. And so that is when I left the classroom in 2022. I have been working with Equality Florida since then, and about a year and a half ago, I became the director for our organizing team and have been really enjoying the work that I do. But as someone said earlier, it must be a lot right now. And all I can say is we are never bored. There is always something to do when it relates to fighting for justice and for a Florida that everyone should be able to be free and happy in. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. I even updated the date so that we're all kosher there with the date correct. But we're going to talk tonight about visibility, about resistance, and then about victories that we have had. The part of the strategy for people who are trying to put down marginalized groups is to make people feel isolated, to make them feel hopeless, to make them feel powerless. They wouldn't try so hard to do that if they didn't know that people working together, people feeling connected, and people standing up together wasn't incredibly powerful. And so we're going to talk a lot tonight about how do you do those things and what can we accomplish. So we'll start with what we're up against in Florida. In Florida, we have supermajorities in both sides of our legislature. So we have a supermajority of Republicans in the House and a supermajority of Republicans in the Senate. We also have a governor who has built his personal brand on attacking LGBTQ rights, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, and generally trying to wage a culture war. A lot of times when people talk about culture wars, they talk about it as a distraction, which generally it is. But it's a distraction that has real consequences for a lot of communities. And so I do not ever want someone to hear me say that the culture wars are a distraction and think that I am dismissing the harm that they cause. Culture wars create real harm for marginalized communities, but generally they are a distraction from something else that's happening. In Florida's particular scenario, they are distracting from the fact that we have had a budget surplus and yet we're still funding our teaching at 48th out of 50 states. It is us having a housing crisis that we have not attempted to even solve. It's all of these pieces where Florida should be providing better for our communities and for people. And instead of having people focus on the affordability crises in Florida, the powers that are currently in control distract with culture wars, which continually harm marginalized groups. We're up against things like book bans across the state, against political intimidation, against censorship. A lot of times, the censorship we're talking about is a combination of actual censorship and the intimidation that makes people self-censor and provides a chilling effect for people being willing to stand up or do something. And all of those things go into a space where it is really hard for us to progress or move forward. And so people get stuck in feeling like there's not anything they can do. The laws are too much, there's too much going on, and we can't move forward. And then on top of that, we should have federal support that should be assisting if our states are going a little bonkers. But instead, we have a federal government that is supportive of the same things that we're seeing in leadership here. And so this is what we're up against. That's probably the last time I'll talk about what we're up against because we also have so much that we can do to overcome every single one of these pieces. The systems that were supposed to protect us haven't been. So the State Department of Education is not supposed to be a political arm. It is supposed to be a group that is there to administer the laws as written. Instead, what we see is these departments are being utilized as political arms and are being weaponized against people. So State Department of Education policies consistently exceed the laws that are written. The healthcare, the State Department of Health, led by LADAPO, doing things that specifically harm patients, LGBTQ patients, but also diminish public health priorities. Local government, our legislature is constantly preempting to make it so that they legally can't do extra or they cannot provide resources for inclusive things happening in their communities. And then again, our federal government is just allowing our states to run amok. One of the biggest examples of this is the Federal Department of Education's Civil Rights Division being almost entirely gutted. And so even if people do feel like their civil rights are being violated by our State Department of Education, there's nowhere for them to turn because that federal overlook isn't here. That is the doom and gloom you see in the news all day, every day, and it is constant. But what we don't see often is the wins that are happening because they don't feel that weight on them. But we are winning in Florida in multiple ways, and it's something that goes unannounced a lot of times. In 2024, there were 22 anti-LGBTQ bills filed in our state house and state senate. 22. In that year, showing up with people, getting people knowledgeable about what was going on, helping make sure that the news understood the bills that they were writing and what was going on so that they could get that information out to people, as harms. We were able to stop 21 of 22 new bad bills from coming forward. By any measure, is a huge victory, but it's not something that you're hear about on the news because generally the news is not going to tell you a bill didn't pass. Very rarely are you going to news about something that didn't happen. And so our communities get to feel isolated because they didn't know this was happening and that they weren't a part of it. In 2025, there were only 8 bills, anti-LGBTQ bills filed last year. And out of those 8, we were able to stop all of them. And so again, that is by any measure an amazing feat when you have a supermajority of Republicans in the House and the Senate and a governor that wants to create this division. Us being able to stop all of those bills is a huge feat. On top of that, the bills that did go through, so the Don't Say Gay bills that went through in 2022 and 2023, almost every single one of the anti-LGBTQ bills that have gone through have been challenged in court, and the DeSantis administration has lost every single court case. We've seen where the anti-drag bill was got an entire stay and was not allowed to be um, put in place until the entire case goes through. We've been able to take out some of the fangs of the other bills or get them stopped in court cases. These aren't things that we hear about very often because, again, they don't feel like the same heaviness as all of the things from the first two slides. At every committee meeting that we have during legislative session, and this has been true for 3 years that I've been part of Equality Florida, we always outnumber our opponents. And I'm not saying like once or twice, every single committee hearing where there is an anti-LGBTQ bill being heard, we outnumber our opponents. It's 10 to 1 or 20 to 1. Last week, we had almost 100 people in Tallahassee for one bad bill, and the opponents had 3 people in the room. When we show up, we have the ability to stop these bills. We become that sand in the gears. The way that we were able to stop those bills, I'll go into a little bit more later, talking about the strategies and the pieces that we put in place to stop these bills. But the real way is through empowering people. I say we as Equality Florida, but Equality Florida is a staff of about 35 people across the state, and 35 people are not going to stop anything. It has taken the movement of thousands of people taking real action, calling their legislatures, calling or emailing them, coming up to Tallahassee, talking to their friends, writing op-eds, showing up in their spaces to be able to stop everything that's going on. So it's not Equality Florida as an org. It is Equality Florida calling to people and people showing up. The people showing up is the piece that does the work. I'm a giant bell, effectively. My job is to be the bell and to ring it as loud as I can and tell everybody what's going on. And with that, people come up and join when they hear it. So we haven't just defended, we've been organizing. Here are some other you might not have heard. So 2024 primaries, that was our last set of elections. 72% of Equality Florida endorsed school board candidates across the state won their races. 2/3 of DeSantis-backed candidates lost. These are electoral wins that are happening, and that happened the same time that there was a red wave across the country. We had, or not across the country, across Florida. There's a red wave across Florida, but even inside that, we had strong equality supporting candidates winning their school board races. In November 2024, it was a really tough election, and there was a red wave across the state of Florida. We took seats that were 14, 15, 18 points apart from each other and brought that down to a less than 1% difference between those votes. Nate Douglas lost his seat by less than 2,000 votes. And that's a seat in Orlando. Sarah Henry is north of Orlando. Leonard Spencer is west of Orlando. All 3 of those seats went incredibly close in a space where previous to that, there was a 10-point swing. We had a lot of really good things happening in those elections, and a lot of it got lost in the doom and gloom of the rest of the news cycle. So when I say we can win and we can have wins, even in a space where we have all of this against us, I'm not saying that out of just wide-eyed rose-colored glasses. We have real things that we've been able to accomplish, even in a space where we have so much that feels insurmountable. So how do we do that? How do we get things moving? How do we move to a space where there can be progress? It's focusing on proven organizing strategies. I told y'all at the very beginning of this, I come from a background of educating and education. During my 11 years in education, I was an organizer with my local education union, but I was also an organizer with our state education union. And the things that I learned in that space about having one-on-one personal conversations as the building blocks is a huge thing that I bring to the table. But so does year-round organizing. A lot of times people only get involved 2 months before an election, and then you never hear from them again. You see this a lot with candidates, but you also see it with organizations. Organizations will come out and knock on doors and call people, and you'll get a call from them once every 2 years, which means you have no reason to trust that they're in the fight with you all the time. You have no reason to trust what they have to say, and it is a very transactional experience. What we've done at Equality Florida over the last 3 years is we have from a field organizing model to an organizing model that is year round, that is deeply based in our communities. We have community organizers in 6 different markets across the state, who are showing up every day for local fights so that by the time we get to we need everybody to come to session, people willing to stand with us because we've been standing with them in their local communities working on things that they cared about. Great example of this, middle of a large surge to push people to Tallahassee last week, this week, and next week. And last week, we started putting together buses for people to get up to Tallahassee. And I want to say Friday last week is when we first sent out saying, hey, we need people to get on buses. If you can, join us. Tomorrow, we will have 39 people getting on buses from Tampa and Sarasota, going up to Tallahassee to organize and to be in these committee meetings. Wednesday, we have people from Orlando and from Gainesville. Almost, I think the last sign up I looked at was 46 people. A giant coach bus seats 50. So we have almost filled that entire bus of people willing on at they're mostly getting on 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning and staying with us all day, getting back home at 10 or 11 o'clock at night. But without having year-round organizing, it doesn't happen. But because the people in communities see us all the time in fights that matter to them, because people know and respect our community organizers, and they hear about the work that we are doing all the time, they were willing on the bus. And so anytime I'm talking to any organization about wanting change, one huge focus has to be that year-round organizing. We cannot come into people about joining something once every 2 years and expect them to jump on board without having a real relationship with them. So moving away from transaction relationships into true solidarity, where we're really standing together and standing with each other. Building intersectional coalitions has been a huge piece for Equality Florida. We connect with the ACLU, NAACP, a group, great, amazing group called Equal Ground. All of these partners that we have, we partner with Planned Parenthood, we partner with Common Cause, all of these different organizations have different groups that they are most focused on. But one thing that we know is that specifically for LGBTQ people come from all races. They come from all religions and non-religions. They come from all levels of ability and disability, all different levels of hierarchy within classes. LGBTQ people come from all of those groups. If we are not connecting with the Jewish Women's Club, then we're probably missing some LGBTQ Jewish women. If we're not connecting with a group that is specifically focused on voting rights for people who are Black and Brown, we are probably missing making sure that LGBTQ people who are also Black and Brown are getting their needs met in that particular way. And so building those intersectional coalitions has been a huge part of what Equality Florida has been doing for the last 2 or 3 years. Because when it's time for something like right now, we're in a fight against a bill we're calling the anti-DEI in local government. It's for us to call in everyone who might be hit by this particular thing because we live in real solidarity with all of these different groups year round. And then continual and focused public pressure, having a clear purpose and sticking to it. A lot of times in movement spaces, you will see that there's a lot of energy around something, but there's not always a clear message about what the demand is or what you're wanting. One of the things that we have gotten really good at is making sure that we have messaging, we're making sure that gets out to our members and to our partners, and then that we are all asking for the same thing. So imagine you're a lawmaker, you hear from 30 constituents saying they don't like HB 601, but they all have a different ask. This one wants you to amend it. That one wants you to amend it this other way. This one wants no entirely. This one wants you to vote yes, but to do this one particular carve out for their group. As an elected official, you're not going to make any of those 30 people happy. And so you do whatever you feel is best. However, if there is a clear purpose and a clear ask, and everyone has the same ask, all of a sudden it becomes a lot harder for that elected official to ignore multitude of people who are showing up. And so having similar talking points, making sure that people have the same ask. So we're all asking them to vote no on this, or we're all asking for them to vote yes on this amendment, can make the power that we do have transfer into more effective actions. Building the narrative and sharing widely. Our comms team has done a really good job with this, but the other piece is having those partners who are willing to share out what's going on. One of the things that I'll chat a little bit later is we have something we call the resistance report. And every week we tell people the stories of what was happening in the Capitol. You'll see winners and losers for the week of elected officials. You will see short versions of the fights that were happening in these committee rooms. You'll see entire votes and how people voted so that you can talk to your elected officials. Part of our service that we provide to the community and to the state as a whole, ensuring that what's happening in the Capitol is easily found and understood. Because we know that for a lot of people, you're just working day to day, trying to get through with things that you're dealing with in your life, in your home, in your community. And you don't have time to watch every committee that's happening in the Capitol day. And so making sure that that information is getting out to as many people as possible is part of the strategy. And then we show up in every space that our community is at risk. Sometimes that's in the legislative session. A lot of times it's in places like city commission meetings, county commission meetings. We do a lot of work with our school boards across the state, because when we do have bills and we have laws that pass, those things get implemented by city commissions, by county commissions, by school board members. And so we have to make sure that those people are to implement whatever is happening in the least possibly harmful way for our community. So continual focus pressure, building those intersectional coalitions, and then proven organizing strategies. All of this together is what it takes to have the wins that we are having. So when we're talking session specifically, the things that we're looking for, we try and fill the room, quite literally bodies in the room. We try to have it so that it's visually easy to tell that all the people that are in the room are outside. Sometimes we do that with a sticker, like a rainbow sticker. Sometimes we do that with, you'll see our lobby days folders. If somebody's holding a lobby days folder, you know that they're there with us, which means even if only 5 people speak at the dais, you look at the 100 people are there with this same coalition. Outnumbering the opposition, like I said earlier, we all outnumber the opposition. That is a point of pride for me and my job and what I do. Um, we always have to be the larger group because in reality, the vast majority of people in Florida are not anti-LGBTQ. They're just not. It's not supported. It's not supported in anything that we follow. But our lawmakers are still perfectly happy to use LGBTQ people as a punching bag. And so we need to make sure that they constantly see that the people who are anti-LGBTQ are a majority of people realistically in Florida. Providing knowledgeable and relevant testimony. Anytime that people join us in the Capitol, we're giving them one-pagers on the bill so that it's easy to understand and easy to determine how best to talk about it. Like I said, we send out our resistance reports. We send out information about how to contact your lawmakers. Generally, we provide things like links where you click and it sends all of the people on a specific committee information about what you're wanting or what you are against. But all of that is knowledgeable and relevant testimony. And then make sure every bad bill is painful for lawmakers. This is some of my favorite parts of organizing. We name the harms. So if you've ever heard of the Don't Say Gay law, that's not the actual name that the person who put together that bill gave it. It has they have their own propaganda name for it called Parents' Rights Bill. Um, but it was renamed partly by our public policy team, and that became the name that then spread across the country. And so it made it a lot harder for any lawmaker to say that they were for the bill because the news would only call it the Don't Say Gay or Trans bill. And so it becomes a lot harder for them to be for it, naming harm. Demanding clarity in their bills, anytime that they have vague language, we ask them to give more clarity in their bills. And generally, they get really frustrated with that. So if we start to point out, here's a hole, here's another place that someone could be using this inappropriately, the bill that we're fighting right now, the biggest bill we're fighting right now is anti DE&I in local governments. And the bill that's going through right now would allow we had someone ask the lawmaker who's putting this bill forward, would a white supremacist be able to sue a local government if that government were to celebrate Yom Kippur? And the person who's putting the bill forward said, well, everyone deserves court. In other words, yes, it would be perfectly acceptable for a white supremacist to sue the city of Sarasota because they celebrated Yom in some type of way. Um, it's absolutely ridiculous things like this. But the great thing about demanding clarity in their bills is oftentimes the person who is putting the bill forward gets frustrated, cannot defend what they're saying or doing, or will say things that they don't necessarily mean to say. And that's where this next piece gets to get them talking on record for use later. If they are clear in their animus towards the people that they're making the law for, we can get the law thrown out later in court. And so it's really important that not only are people showing up trying to stop the bill entirely, but even if we know that the bill will pass, getting the people who are writing these bills on record saying pretty horrible things on record can get those overturned in court later. One of the best examples was Webster Barnaby called LGBTQ people, specifically trans people, demons and imps when he was in a committee meeting. And that was one of the criticisms of evidence that the people who sued the state against that bill then utilized to get the bill halted or to get that law halted from being actually enforced. Getting them on record to say the quiet part out loud is a huge part of strategy for us in session. And then the last piece, and it's not the most effective, but it's fun, is wasting their time. They only have 60 days of session, and they have to decide, am I going to let 2 hours of this very vital committee time be used to hear all of these things from people who are showing up to speak? Or do I have 5 other bills that I would like to actually get passed? We change the math that they do, the political math they do, in deciding whether or not being harmful and hateful to our community is worth the time and energy that they're letting it have. Because there are only so many days in the legislative session, and they've promised people other bills that they need to get through. And so, one of our most effective ways is this time space, because a lot of times lawmakers, especially on the Senate side, will pull something entirely off an agenda and do something called a temporary postponement. And then it might never get back to committee. If it doesn't finish its committee cycles appropriately, it doesn't go to the main floor for a vote, which means that bill is killed and won't be moving forward. That time wasting is incredibly valuable because it makes them hurt, is that they have to decide what's important. Is it important for me to pass this blueberry farmers, or is it better for me to spend my time hating on LGBTQ kids? If they have to make that choice and they promise the blueberry farmers something, a lot of times they'll drop the hateful things because realistically, no one is asking for it. No one is asking and out there going, you know what I really want you to do, lawmaker? Make someone else's life miserable. I would like for you to do that for me today. There's no one lobbying them for these anti-LGBTQ bills most of the time. They would rather file and fill and push through bills that are things that they promised to constituents or to people that have given them money at some point. So, with that strategy knowledge, what is some things that you can do within your community? Register and mobilize. Make sure that you and your networks of people are registered to vote and ready to engage locally. This is especially true right now when we're looking at something like the SAVE Act possibly passing, making sure that everyone in your community has all of the documentation they need, that their registration is up to date, that they have registered for getting a vote by mail ballot if that's how they choose to vote. All of those things are really, really hard for groups to do. So, like my organization reaching out to people to do that. Um, we're we're a trusted source for LGBTQ issues. Generally, they would rather hear from someone that they already know and that they're friends with about engaging to vote. And so, if you are doing that, that is a huge step in the right direction. Connecting with local organizations. So, I'm saying find your states. I'm a most of you are here in Florida, which it would be Equality Florida. But if you're not in Florida, I know at least one person said they were from Detroit. There are other equality organizations like Equality in other states, and so you can find yours there. Monitor the local power and things that are happening. So school board meetings, commission meetings, any agencies that something's happening. Often that's where a lot of these fights begin. Um, so book bans is a great example of this. Those fights started at local school boards, and then about a year and a half after we started at local school boards, it started becoming something that they talked about in Tallahassee. If we're watching what's happening at those local spaces, it's insight into what might come later on. And then it's also where things get implemented later. So once the book ban concept became something that Tallahassee was paying attention to, the laws that they passed about what schools can have in their libraries have to go back and be implemented in those spaces. If you're focused on so sorry. If you're focused on what's happening in your local community, you're going to see what might be coming down the pike later, and you're going to be there to help with implementing whatever is going on. Then, lastly, showing up, picking up, whether it's at a public hearing committee or whether you're emailing or calling, your voice as a constituent, especially when it's combined with lots and lots of other people speaking too, and especially if it's focused on one or two issues is incredibly powerful. It is one of the most powerful things we have. It is part of why they struggle so much to make people feel isolated, to make people feel like they don't have power. The biggest thing that they can do is make you feel disempowered because then you won't. My job and the job of organizers across the state is to make people feel empowered. It is to make people realize just how much power you really do have. And the only reason they fight so hard against it is because they know that that's the thing that changes the world. Continued public pressure is one of the only things that can change power structures without the power wanting to change. Your space in activism, not everyone has time to give, but everyone has one of these three, generally speaking. You have time, you have some type of talent, or you have treasure. And treasure generally is meaning donations. If you are someone who is working a lot and you work 12-hour days and you do not have time to volunteer, maybe you have a talent that other people don't. Maybe you are great at doing printing for t-shirts, or you're not someone who's going to go march in the No Kings March, but you are someone who can make sure that the community members around you all get fed when they get home. Those are pieces that you can contribute to movement work. And then treasure, obviously, if you have the ability to donate to organizations that are doing good work, like NAACP, like Equal Ground, like Equality Florida. If you can't show up time and talent, make sure that you're providing that monetary support for groups that are doing work that you see value in. And this is not a pitch for donations for Florida. We will take them, but I'm saying that is one of the ways that you can be in the activism space. Set your personal goals for what you're wanting to do. So if you are wanting to make sure that you are more engaged in your local community, Maybe you are setting, I'm going to spend 20 minutes a day looking through the agenda for our local school board and our county commission to make sure I'm familiar with what they're doing. That's something that you can do that it's not going to be seen by anyone else, but you know that you are getting more familiar with what's going on, paying attention to who is making these decisions. And maybe you make your goal that you're going to pay attention to the agendas. And if there's something that feels like a big thing, you'll show up and speak. Those are personal goals that you can set. Um, and then the part is more so not not feeling like organizations or people are going to show up and do it for you. Oftentimes people feel like they're waiting for the cavalry to appear. We're waiting for a white knight to show up and save us. And my decade of experience in organizing tells me that doesn't exist. There isn't a white knight waiting in the wings. There isn't um, some great and powerful single human being that's going to show up and show you exact way to move and to do things. Um, it has to be with. So we organize with each other. We show up in community together. We are in solidarity with each other, and that's how things move. Um, I came from Georgia, grew up in Atlanta, and a lot of people will talk about state forums, and 100%, she is an amazing woman who has done an incredible amount of things for Georgia. And the reason that Georgia is successful is because she did the things that I went through here. She built powerful coalitions of organizations. She helped empower people that were on the ground. She made sure that people were getting knowledge about what was going on in their state and that this election was. Stacey Abrams isn't what changed Georgia. Stacey Abrams was a face for a movement of people that were working with each other. And so we've got to start seeing ourselves movements and seeing where we fit in that machine and mechanism to build justice and to build resilience and to build community power. Because it cannot happen with one single showing up to do the work. So I'm going to pause there. I would love questions. We'll have them. I'm also going to stop sharing so I can see your faces. But that was all of my presentation. So I'm going to hand it to Ken.
All right. Thank you, Anita. I appreciate it very much. I've got a lot of questions for you, but I want to go around the room before I start. And let me just ask you this one, and then we'll go to Wendell. How long have you been, and maybe you said this and I missed it, how long have you been advocating for Equality Florida?
I started working at Equality Florida in 2022. I started working in a job that didn't exist before here. We had our organizing department, our Safe and Healthy Schools department, and our political department. And the first job that I had with Equality Florida didn't exist before I got here. And it was to be a person that sat at the intersection of schools, politics, and organizing and built our program of organizing around.
Okay, cool. And what did you do
So,
immediately before Equality Florida?
so I left the classroom on a Friday. I was a sixth grade science teacher, and on Monday I started working for Quality. So it
Oh,
was a weekend and teaching
all
and
right.
working for.
And somehow you haven't left the teaching realm. You're still teaching. All right.
I feel like organizing is very similar to education.
Yeah. All right. Wendell, what's your comment or question?
Thank you. Hello, wonderful humans. Thank you for having me. Okay, I'll try to make this as concise as possible. Is there a way? Okay, let's say you've got crackheads, and the crackheads are going to steal your equipment, a VCR, whatever. But there's a law that says it's illegal to steal people's VCR. Now, you have a ton of crackheads, one after the other, and you have to defend your VCR from them. Now, is there a government agency or like attorneys who would sue on behalf of people whose civil rights are being violated by
Mm,
these people who would bring these bills continuously, kind of like Hydra, if you're familiar with that. Right. Is there a, because I don't mean to sound rude. It's this is ridiculous. It's because you're like, is there an endless supply of these conservative religious zealots? What the, anyway, I did I make sense? Did I ask a question?
Yeah, that's a
I
good.
know.
I think it's a good question, Anita. What do you say?
I think that I've got your question. I'm going to rephrase it in a bit to make sure that I've got it right before I try to answer it. So, have a continual source of bad bills coming from elected officials. How do we stop the source of bad bills? Because and can we effectively um, have an agency or some legal recourse in them filing bad bills? On that sort of where you're ending, Wendell, I want to make sure I've got the question right before I answer. Yes. Okay.
Yes, good.
Okay. The way to stop the constant attacks from the same elected officials is to replace the elected officials. So there's not necessarily a way that we can stop um, Barnaby, Barnaby from filing bad bills, except for the ballot box and replacing him with someone who's not going to file those bad bills. Now, on the other side of it, when they do file bad bills, especially if we can prove animus against a marginalized community, or if the bills are too broad, or if the bills create harm in ways that are breaking your civil rights, for example, do work very, very heavily with a lot of different legal partners to make sure that those are taken to court. So Southern Legal Counsel is a group that we work a lot with, especially around trans rights. We work with Lambda Legal. We work with the National Council for Lesbian Rights, which is all three of those are specifically working on combating legislation that has passed and trying to get it either completely enjoined, which means it cannot be enforced, or get it removed, or get parts of it removed that are most harmful. So once something passes, we do have a lot of recourse. Unfortunately, we don't have legal recourse to stop bad bills from happening before they happen, other than in elections. The way we stop bad bills from coming forward is elections. And so that's why for our work, we both do legislative session and elections work. We have both because you need better people fighting in Tallahassee in the first place. We need better people elected. But once they're there, they get to bring forward things that they want to bring forward. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. And if I could be allowed to do a shameless plug that I'm running for governor of the state of Tennessee in 2026, is that allowed?
You just did it. Yeah. So, Wendell, are you in Tennessee right now?
Correct.
Okay, and you said you're running for office?
Governor of the state of Tennessee. I'm on the ballot.
Oh, well, congratulations, Wendell.
Why,
Uh,
thank
that
you.
that's a big undertaking, and I know some people who say that one of the best ways to counteract the opposition is to actually run for office. I don't know if that's true, but I know people who have done it, and in the process, they've exposed others. So I have a question for you, Anita. You mentioned the ACLU and the NAACP and Equality Ground and several others as your reliable partners. Who would you describe as your loyal opposition?
Um, I I know I'm not trying to hedge. I know the lobbyist name that's in Tallahassee, and I'm forgetting the organization that he works for. Um, there is one lobbyist in Tallahassee that shows up for every anti-LGBTQ bill in favor. I think it's the American Families Coalition, maybe. I'm not going to say that that's true. I believe that that's what it is. But they parade themselves as promoting family values, but often are fighting against families that are LGBTQ families, and LGBTQ families are also families. And a lot of what they fight against is things that they consider um, some type of negative, but we got their lobbyist. I'm not going to name him because he needs extra help in being known. But he, during a fight about a bill last year, where we were talking about pronoun usage, he went off on a tangent that was so heinous that he got that bill temporarily postponed and then it never came back. So we thanked him that day for being so heinous in his vitriol against queer people that the Republican who was leading the committee at the time resigned the committee, stopped what the committee was doing. It got temporarily postponed and it never came back. So we do have loyal opposition. We do have groups that are, and when I say groups, it is generally well funded, um, not grassroots based organizations from a national space that have other reasons that they want culture wars to be existing. We don't have a lot of groups that show up that are grassroots or that are Florida based. Very, very rarely we have a set of volunteers show up that are pro anti LGBTQ issues. Um, Very, very rare.
Which is more troubling for you as an organization? The vast amount of money that is thrust into bills that that you ultimately defeat, and some of them you don't defeat, or the wacky religious take that people have relative to the LGBTQ plus community, and for lack of a better term, we'll call them Christian nationalists. So the money versus religion.
For me personally, and probably for all of Equality Florida, I would say that the money is frustrating because for every dollar that the opposition has more than you have to pull in more people to get your point across, right? So if they have $100 or $100,000 more than you do, I need to be able to pull in probably 3,000 people to do the work that we're doing. That is frustrating, but that is not the more dangerous thing for me. The thing that is more dangerous is the weaponization of belief to the point that wrapping Christianity and being white and being um, a specific prescribed version of humans is what American means, and anything outside of that is a problem because that is going to harm not just LGBTQ people, it will harm people of other religions or no religion. It will harm people who are Black and Brown. It will harm, as we're seeing very tremendously play out across the country, immigrant people who are showing up in our communities. And it is so much harder to fight against that than it is to fight against money. The fight against money is grassroots and people. I am so happy to have that fight. I don't want to constantly fight anti LGBTQ bills, but I am happy to empower people and pull them into this. It is insidious, constant problem to deal with people who have been weaponized by their beliefs. And I say this as someone, my grandfather was a Methodist minister. I grew up very deeply religious in my community. Um, and there is a huge difference between Christianity and white Christian nationalism. And white Christian nationalism is the thing that is completely wrecking our communities across the country.
Thank you, Anita, for that response. Let's go to Fred and then we'll go to Susan. Fred, what's on your mind? Unmute, Fred.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. You're just kind of following up on that. It seems to me that it's not just the gay LGBT thing, but they're trying to destroy democracy in this country. And our current president is the fulcrum of that, trying to do away with the elections this year. And that didn't even happen during the Civil War. Lincoln didn't even think about that. He said, "No, we are not going to cancel elections. We're going to hold the elections," even though, early in 1864, he seriously thought he might lose the election, but they held him. But it seems like they just wanted to destroy democracy and impose their tyranny on the entire nation.
For that, I would, especially around elections, one of the great things about how our elections are set up is while we do have federal elections, elections processes are not federalized. And so to combat having one person be able to say, no, we're not going to do this, having state-based elections protections is incredibly valuable. I sit on several different committees and groups around election protections because that's also something that Equality Florida does a lot of work with. And the elections protection spaces right now are lit up with what are we doing? How do we do this? I talked to elections protection people up in Georgia as well around responding to the Fulton County, the FBI raiding the Fulton County Elections Office. Those things are huge oversteps. And also, it gave the rest of the states a heads up of here's something that could happen. What should you be doing? How can you prevent? What should you be ready with? So just know that there are huge communities of election protection organizers that are working in those spaces. But one of the best things we have around our federal elections is that our federal elections aren't federalized. They aren't controlled by the federal government. They're controlled at the state level. And so to be able to impact all 50 states at one time would be an incredibly difficult feat. That's part of why you'll start hearing, if you haven't already, both the president and Republican leadership talking about wanting federal elections to be run by federal government. That would be a huge misstep if that does happen, because that's one of the protections we have against tyranny.
Fred, you got a follow up? You're good. Okay, let's go to Susan.
Thank you. And this is kind of a personal problem, and I was late, and I apologize for that. So if this is an inappropriate question, just say pass, or you can call me later or something. So sometimes I'm on Facebook too much, and I have people, 2 times I was kicked out of Facebook groups because they said I ranted on about trans rights, and I'm not even trans. This one person said we shouldn't argue for trans rights because it alienates people or something like that. I'm not really sure what their position was, but I kept saying, well, trans rights, they're a minority and we have to speak up for them. We can't discard them. And I don't know if it's what I said or just because I wouldn't shut up. And I mean, that's a personal problem. I realize sometimes you got to know when to walk away. But I guess what I'm trying to ask you is if you have any advice for me, like in general, how do you speak up for people without being annoying?
That is a great question. That's definitely something that I've dealt with even within the LGBTQ community. We have certain people who are not trans or non-binary that will talk to me about why Equality Florida is so focused on trans rights right now. And my answer is generally because those are the ones that are this. And when you think about the famous poem, "The First They Came for the Trade Unionists," you don't wait for them to come to you. You stop them at the people they're attacking first. And so, whatever are your most marginalized groups, those are going to be the groups that get attacked first. And you don't wait for them to be attacking a larger and larger and larger group before you do something or say something. You also don't abandon that group when they are your most marginalized groups. The other piece that I can say that is really important is every single right that we talk about for trans people are rights that everyone else would also have issues with if those trans people lose them. So for example, the right to bodily autonomy and being able to choose what you do with your body. That is at the foundation of a lot of trans rights issues. But if we were to lose the right to bodily autonomy, which we've seen with the reversal of Doe, you will start losing other spaces of bodily autonomy. And so the reason that we need to ensure that we are fighting for the rights of the groups that are currently under the most fire is both as a stopgap and as a protection for our own rights. Because any time that power can erode rights of individuals, they will continue doing that until they're stopped. There's no reason for us not to focus on the ones they're working on right now, because it only gets harder as we go forward. So that's normally how I talk to people about it. And then the other piece is at some point, you're not going to win over that person. And so it's worthwhile to drop in that moment, or to find a different group to organize with. Because if they're not aligned with you on protecting our most marginalized people, then they might not be aligned with you on the actual fight that you're having. So I definitely, there have been people that have volunteered with us. We have donors that we've separated with over this right. And I'm perfectly comfortable in dropping those volunteers or those donors because they don't see the dignity and value and worth in our trans community. And so it's not worth keeping that person from me.
Um, Anita, do you think Facebook arguments are worthwhile, or do they trigger algorithms that support the opposition, and do they offer only cognitive biases? What's your argument or your comments relative to general social media arguments?
I can give you my personal view on this. I will have conversations with people that I am friends with in some way. And when I say friends, I do not mean close pals. I mean someone who I friended at some point on social media. That means we have some tangential connection. I will have those conversations with those people because they're more likely to listen to you as a person they have a real connection to than to a random stranger on the internet. Will I get on like West 2 News's website and argue with random people in the comments? No. And the reason I don't is because half of the time they're not even people, they're bots. You're arguing with people that don't exist. The other half of the time, you are pushing forward in the algorithm that this type of news is good to get engagement, and therefore you should make more of this. And if what they just put out was a trap headline that gets people to click something, but the story didn't really fit it, don't give them engagement. They're click farming, they're trying to get people engaging in that space. So while I do think it's worthwhile to have real conversations with people you know are people online, even if you completely disagree with them, I don't think it's worthwhile to talk to people you don't know at all. Um, I will extend that sometimes to like a friend of a friend. So if my friend Barb wrote a topic and I'm talking on it and Stephen joins and says, I completely disagree with you, I might have that conversation with Stephen, but I'm still not going to have that conversation with random bots or people on more public spaces. For me, that's generally where I stay.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Let's go to Zofia. One day, Zofia, if I'm saying that correctly, maybe you'll tell us how the Z got in front of your name.
Yes, it's I'm Polish, and it's my grandma called me Zosia, but you have to kind of say it with a Polish accent. And I don't know if my question's appropriate because I put it down in the text to make sure I kind of got it out right. Because I
Mhm.
feel kind of like outcast from the LGBT community here. I have been up to lobby days one time, and it was I didn't feel very welcomed, not by you, but by somebody else.
Okay.
And I don't know, I feel like this rift in the community where I lived in other places, I was like a leader and an advocate, a Peace Corps volunteer, and I come to Florida and I just don't feel accepted by any group or misunderstood. So it's kind of a two-way question of what I asked in the text and kind of how to find my place in that community again.
Okay. So I did read your question in the chat, and I agree about, so earlier I talked about how important it is to have intersectional motion spaces and building to make sure that we're not leaving anyone out who is LGBTQ, because they can come from any race, any religion, any class. That's also true for any type of neurodivergence. I will say, and I don't think any of my team would be upset with this, and I'm not saying the whole staff of Equality Florida, but my entire team is neurodivergent, all of us. And part of the great thing about that is there is real evidence around LGBTQ people and neurodivergent people having a lot of overlap. Um, and so if we are not talking about things that are harming people that are neurodivergent, people who are autistic, people who are ADHD, people who are in other ways have some type of neurodivergence or other disabilities, we are leaving out LGBTQ people that need those things to be said. One of the groups that we do a lot of work with is with Disability Rights Florida. They do a lot of work around specifically disability, but just like with LGBTQ people, people who have disabilities can come from any race, any religion, any class, any of those pieces. And so we end up overlapping quite a bit because those fights are the same. When I'm talking about trans rights and I'm talking about bodily autonomy, if I'm not standing up for that right, what is to say that they're not going to start doing the same thing they are doing to trans people, to other people that they deem not able to make healthcare decisions for themselves, like people who are autistic, like people who are neurodivergent in some way. So from my perspective, and definitely from the perspective of Equality Florida, those rights are intersectional. And every time we are fighting for one, we are fighting for all of it. But we also join our partners in fights that are specific to people with disabilities, including those in the neurodivergent community. So,
Do you know who Disability Rights Florida? Like I did work with them because I was didn't get my rights working with like a big company for my accommodations. And
mhm.
they told me to go to what's that one in UCF? I don't know, it's a big autism card. And card basically is Autism Speaks in Florida. So basically, when you're saying you support Disability Rights Florida, you're supporting an Autism Speaks type of organization. And as an autistic person, I don't subscribe to that.
Yeah, Autism Speaks has issues with people who are autistic speaking a lot of the time, and I have issues with
Uh-huh.
that as well.
Well, that's who
So
Disability Rights Florida is associated with.
with
I've
Autism
actually
Speaks,
talked to them about, yeah.
oh, definitely willing to connect more. That was not my understanding from them, but
Oh yeah,
definitely.
we get in quite big arguments about that type of things and stuff. So I'm kind of like, this is why I'm like outcast in the community because I bring things up that people don't want to, oh, we have to fight for trans rights. We can't fight for everybody. And that's kind of like the feeling I got when I went to lobby days. And it's
Yeah.
just, I
I will
don't
say
find
for
my place in that. I'm not saying I'm saying I feel that, but I'm hoping that can change or I can find something that'll change my view of that.
I will say for when people are up with us for lobby days, the one pagers and things that we are giving to people are specifically about LGBTQ specific laws. That does not mean that we don't have other advocacy things that we are doing for the intersectional places that communities have hit. But I will say for our main slate in lobby days, especially if you were with us in like 2024 when there were
Yeah, it
22
was before that. But yeah, but one of the lawmakers on our side was like using the term, well, that's retarded. And then the person from like whoever just dismissed it. It's like, oh, I'm like, what? Like, so it wasn't just, it was kind of like in the face and then dismissed right in front of me. I was like, oh my God, no, we have to have rights for everybody. And I think that's kind of where the movement is losing steam is like some people I feel like are cherry picking and it's just like human rights are human rights. Like I'm a descendant of Holocaust survivors, and I just know that those inches you can't just say, oh, it's okay for them, but we're going to focus on this person.
agreed.
You know,
Yeah.
Sophia, it's such an interesting thing that you raise because what you're raising is the idea that there are so many issues that need to be addressed in our legislatures, state and national. And when you talk about autism, and you mentioned that you are autistic in some level, I assume, on your own, and you mentioned Autism Speaks, there are lots of organizations who advocate for autism and autistic individuals. It is true, though, would you agree, Zofia, that it is difficult, if not impossible, for any one organization to advocate for everyone?
When you look at people and separate them, it is difficult, but when you look at humans as human, then it's not.
Right, right. Okay, let's not. And I'm not minimizing anything. I'm just saying there are logistical aspects. There's limited resources. There's limited individuals who can actually go out and speak. And to feel marginalized is not a good feeling. That's a bad thing. And Anita, I think you can speak to the actual feelings of being marginalized. Can you not?
Definitely can, and I guess a good place sort of to wrap up, Sophia, unless you have more, but as the organizing director for Equality Florida, and as someone who has been with Equality Florida for almost 4 years, we're coming June 1st will be 4 years. Um, the concept of intersectional identities and how marginalized groups, so you can be Black and queer and neurodivergent and physically disabled. And if I am not looking at you as a whole, then I'm not actually getting to the point where we are advocating for you fully. So I hear all of that 100%. And depending on the space that we are in and in the time that we are in, there might be a stronger focus on one part of that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the other parts are being ignored, at least not in the tenure, in the time that I've been there. I cannot speak for before that, but I just want to make sure that um, that
Yeah.
is out there for Quality Florida specifically.
Good. Well, we do have a few minutes left, and in the remaining time that we have, I want everybody, if you have a question for Anita, let's get it together and pose it to Anita. And in the meantime, I've got two more questions for you, but let's go to Susan again.
Yes, I really appreciated Anita's answer to my question. So I have a follow-up question, and I hope this is okay. It's a selfish question, of course, but since I have Anita here as an expert, I was wondering if she'd be willing to talk about the difference between, because she's an expert on civil rights, the difference between a trans girl playing in school sports, so she gets to participate, as compared to trans women participating in sports that have a high outcome where you can make a lot of money by winning that sports game, as compared to just letting everybody participate. And I would like her opinion on that, because I waffle about it and I really don't know what to think.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Trans in sports. I was getting ready to ask that same question or a similar question. Go ahead, Anita.
This is definitely a question that I get a lot. It's a question that my organizers get a lot, and it is one that a lot of people wrestle with. And the reason that people tend to look at it is because they feel like people might transition in order to gain advantage, right? That's the narrative that we hear all the time. We know both data wise and just in and knowing that something like this would have been sensationalized, no one is transitioning to be able to have a um, a positive in that space. There is no one who is leading their life as a woman for 5, 10, 15 years so that they can go and perform and compete against women. That's not happening. So we can start with that on the face. But on top of that, we have significant data that shows that trans women who have been on hormone replacement therapy for more than a year and a half, which 18 months is what the IOC, the Olympics committees used to require before they changed their rules, they do not have a statistical advantage over women who were assigned female at birth. They do not have it. And especially when you get to the level of elite athletes, when you're talking about professional athletes or when you're talking about Olympic athletes, the people in those fields generally do have some sort of innate bodily thing that makes them better at it. For example, Phelps winning all of the swimming things he did, when you compare his wingspan of his arms to other swimmers, he has a longer wingspan than every other swimmer before him, but we wouldn't disqualify him because he has a natural advantage. But somehow, when we get to trans women who are less than 0.0001% of people who are athletes, and that gets even smaller the higher up you go in athletics, we would take away their ability to participate because they might have the possibility, maybe, of some type of advantage. It doesn't make sense given that we don't do that for any other advantage. We wouldn't make a basketball player stop playing because they're taller than everyone else. That doesn't make sense. And on top of that, trans women generally don't have an advantage compared to others. If we did, we would see them dominating women's sports, and they're not. Even the most extreme example we have out there that people talk about constantly is Leah Thomas. And Leah Thomas tied for fifth in that heat. She tied for fifth. That's not dominating the sport. And the person who complained about it the most was the woman who also tied with her for fifth. They were both beaten by four cisgender women, which tells you outright that she's not got a crazy crazy advantage over the cisgendered women that were in that sport. And so anytime I'm talking to people about trans women in sports, even at an elite level, there is no statistical information that proves that there is an advantage. We don't take people off of the court if they do have a physical advantage, and there's not that many of them to begin with. Now, if you go back to K to 12 sports, they're kids. We need to be allowing kids to exist and to experience the world and to join teams and to play with their friends. And there is no reason for us to be stopping kids from experiencing team sports. In Florida, we had an example of this. There was a girl, I believe she was a junior at this point on a girls' volleyball team. She had transitioned very young. I want to say she was 6 or 7 when she originally transitioned to being female. So no one of her school friends knew, no one other than her parents knew that she was trans. Her mom worked at the school. This was down in Miami. And so her coaches knew because she had to have physical forms, and her mom knew, and that was it. She wasn't a show out superstar. She wasn't dominating the field. She was just a girl on a high school volleyball team. But when the news got a hold of that, the state disqualified her and removed her mom's teaching license for lying on forms, even though she had not lied, her daughter had transitioned. That is a type of bigotry and just outright ridiculousness trans kids especially face when we start talking about trans people in sports. So generally I try to push for people to think about it from a humanitarian perspective, and also realize it is a very, very small percentage. West Virginia passed a law about trans kids in sports, and they had one in the whole state of West Virginia, one trans student participating in sports.
Yeah, Anita, you mentioned Leah Thomas, the NCAA swimmer winner in 2022, a male transitioning to a female, and she won handily. In tennis, we separate the competition between male and female. And the reason that's done is because the male is stronger typically than the female. Not all males are stronger than all females, etc. We get that. But the sport separates female and male in terms of their competition. Here's the question. How do you respond to people who have suggested that the trans community have their own organization in terms of sport and let trans people compete against trans people?
So the first sort of easy reason that that doesn't work is there are so few trans people to exist in sports anyway that isn't. So example, the one trans athlete, I believe they were a runner in West Virginia. Who does that person compete against? There's one in the whole state. Who does that person compete against? So just logistically speaking, that's not feasible. But the other piece that is a bit more damaging there is it is treating that person as if they are not the gender that they are. So trans women competing with women because they're women. Trans men competing with men because they're men. That is the piece that is disqualifying about that concept is it treats trans people as if they are not full human beings that do have a gender. They're women, they're men. But the other piece that people seem to forget is so if you have a trans woman who is playing sports, generally there are rules. So the the Olympics allowed trans people to compete in the Olympics for the last, I want to say 17 years, maybe 18 years, I don't remember. But at one point, they did have tests that they were doing, blood tests, to make sure that women who were competing did not have a Y chromosome. And they had to halt those tests because women who were born and assigned female at birth and had outwardly female genitalia and had been raised their whole lives believing they were women found out through those tests that they were actually intersex and were not people who didn't have a Y chromosome. They stopped doing that testing because gender is a social construct, sex is wildly different than one or the other. There is a huge range in between. And if we don't start living in a space where we live in real science, we can't make good choices. The entire concept around removing trans people from sporting at all is based in not believing that trans women are women and believing that they have some type of advantage. And so anytime that people who count themselves as allies try to go down that road, I try to caution them against it because it is based in a concept that trans women are not women and therefore should not be in those spaces.
Okay, I appreciate your response. Before we go, one last question for you, Anita, if I may. Can you describe the wackiest bill that you defeated?
Um, yeah, I don't know if it's the wackiest, but it's definitely like playing whack-a-mole. I think that's how I'll put it. Banning the flag bans has been the funniest one for me. This will be the fourth year that the state legislature has had someone try to ban um, political flags, and I put that in quotation marks because LGBTQ flags are not political; they're identity based. There are Republican queer people. They exist. Don't always understand them, but they do exist. It's not a political flag, it's an identity flag. But they've been trying to ban flags that are political in nature from being put on government businesses, which would include schools, airports, city municipality buildings, things like that, for 4 years now. And every year we play whack a mole and we get it to go away and then it comes back. And every year it comes back slightly different. This year they're trying to make it so that because they saw in other states that, like, I think it was Utah, Salt Lake City has an official flag that is just the LGBTQ flag, but it's their official city flag now. And that's how they got around being able to do that in Utah with the same law. Now, the bill this year around banning flags includes that cities can't have an official city flag that looks like a political flag. It's ridiculousness. They are absolutely ridiculous, and they don't have any real basis in what harms this might create or why they're doing it. There's no one out there walking around going, you know what I hate? Pride flags on the city council in June. Like no one's showing up to your office to talk to you about this. But it really is like playing whack-a-mole because we've been able to get rid of it for 3 solid years. This will be year 4. I'm not gonna say yes, we've got it because we still need people showing up, but like it's not wanted. It's not necessary. No one is being harmed. Can we stop playing whack-a-mole with the same bill that y'all can't seem to get passed, even with a supermajority in the House, the Senate, and the Republican governor? What are you doing? That's my worst one.
Right. And well, you mentioned wasting the time of your loyal opposition. Are they doing the same to you?
No, because the reason we have to show up is anytime you erase visibility of marginalized communities, you are creating harm. So earlier when I talked about they use culture war as a distraction from what they're doing, but the culture wars that they create have real harm to our communities. The same thing is happening here. It is definitely a good use of our time to be in these committees and to take up as much time as we can because we are reducing harm. That's for me the difference is they're not wasting my time by me showing up and making sure that people are still visibly allowed to be themselves in public. They're not wasting my time. I'm just simply showing up again for marginalized communities and to make sure that people have their rights. So
I think it was Woody Allen who said that 99 or 90%, or I don't know what the percentage is, 99% of life is just showing up. Susan, you got one brief comment?
Yeah, I'll take just less than 1 minute. I just wanted to echo what Anita said. I was on the basketball team when I was in junior high, and I felt it was a great benefit. I might have been the worst player on the team. I never got to play in the games, and I wouldn't have cared if there was a trans girl on the team, and maybe there was. Who knows? Nobody knew back then, right? So, but it was a great experience, and I don't want to deny anyone that experience. So I think that's really important. I mean, you don't have to do it if you don't want to, but I think everybody should be allowed.
All right. Well, I hope you're still playing basketball someplace. Okay, good. Thank you very much, Anita. We didn't even get to talk about Oberfeld versus Hodges. That's, maybe you can make a brief comment on that because that's what legalized same-sex marriage across the country. And the question I have for you, and I know this is a big question, but do you hear in your rumblings around the Tallahassee Capitol when you're walking through the halls, people talking about overturning that?
So earlier this year, there was a lot of news around, I know her first name is Kim, I cannot remember her last name, bringing forward to the Supreme Court a case that might be able to overturn a Obergefell. However, her standing, she didn't even have standing for that case. It's part of why it didn't get heard. I, unless we see something similar to what we saw with a complete reversal with Doe, I don't foresee that happening, at least not this year or maybe the next year. They would have to have someone who has standing in front of the Supreme Court and someone who can show significant harm. And right now, I would love for you to try to name me the harm that someone else's marriage does to you. And so it becomes a lot harder to argue the harm and the standing there. I'm not saying it's impossible. But unlike where we saw like the wedding cake issue where the person creating the cake said that there was harm because they were being forced to do something against their will, with things like marriage rights, it is really hard to argue that someone else's marriage is harming you. There's nothing you're being forced to do. There's no real money loss. There's no pieces of that nature. It would have to be something related to like a church official being required to provide a marriage for a gay couple. And since that's not happening anywhere, it's really hard to imagine that coming forward. It doesn't mean that it's not a fear and a not completely unfounded fear, because Doe was the foundational piece of the concept of privacy. And when that fell, it makes the argument around Loving v. Virginia and around Obergefell v. Hodges shakier. So that would be my biggest concern, is it makes their arguments shakier because they relied on the previous precedent set by Doe that's now been overturned. So there is real fear. It's not crazy and imagined, but I also don't think it's coming up anytime soon, because I haven't seen cases that are moving through the courts that have enough standing and enough harm that they could take it to that level. So that's my thoughts for now.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments regarding that. Anita, in our closing moments, do you have anything you'd like to sum up with? Anything you'd like to say? You know, your website, whatever you'd like. This is your time to shine, Anita.
I am going to put our week 5 resistance report, which is coming straight from our website, in the chat. I would love for people to click it to see what I'm talking about when I say resistance report. It'll give you a really good summation of what's happening right now in the Florida legislature. And then within that resistance report, there are a ton of links that you can click, and it says contact your legislature now. It'll either populate an email ready for you to send that sends it to the right committee members, or that sends it to your specific legislator, or that sends it to your specific senator or your House rep. Those links are incredibly valuable, but on that same page, you can sign up to have it emailed to you every week. I would highly recommend doing that if you are wanting to know what's going on in the session. This session, we have 26 days, I think, left, 25 days left of session. So we're a little over halfway there. But I beg people to pay attention to what's going on both in the legislative session and in your local area. And if you see anything that's going on around LGBTQ rights, around reproductive freedoms, around immigrant coalition spaces, all of these things are things that we're doing work on around election protection. Please let me know, and I'm happy to get connected and see what we can do to help.
Thank you very much, Anita. Appreciate you very much. We all appreciate you. This is a time to say thank you to Anita. Thumbs up, hand claps. Find your emoji buttons and hit them hard. Double press them all. Thank you, Anita. We're going to say goodnight. And I do hope that everybody gets home safely. Thank you all.
Thank you, Anita.
Thank you all so much. I appreciate it.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.